decided to go ahead and swear Hans Sedlmayr in under sworn oath and question him about whether he was supporting Mengele, the family was, money was going to him, or anything else. Sedlmayr lied just through his teeth, said we'd never seen him, don't know anything about him, probably dead, don't send him a penny. And they never went out to find out anything else. They accepted his word.
Mengele's long flight is now nearly 20 years in the making.
Auschwitz is liberated in January 45, but before that happens, Mengele's made good his escape.
But he got away 10 days before the Red Army liberated the camp. It was complete and utter chaos. Tens of thousands of prisoners moving through the camps at the same time. Nobody quite sure of who was anybody.
He fled with a suitcase full of his scientific findings.
And he was picked up finally by the Americans in June of 1945. What saved him was that Mengele's vanity. When he had joined the SS, one of the things you had to do was have a blood type tattoo put under your arms.
So that if they were wounded and unconscious, they would know what kind of blood for transfusions. He was fastidious, narcissistic, and he didn't want a tattoo, apparently.
Mengele didn't want to mar his body.
So he never had that distinguishing feature of an SS man or officer, and that really helped him.
So in the days at the end of the war, and they had quite a simple litmus test. Take off your shirts, raise your hands. If they found a tattoo, they put you to one side and they would interrogate you. If there was no tattoo and you had some kind of reasonable story, then you were released, which is what happened with him.
After the war, Mengele drifts homeward through Germany.
Mengele did not go back and live openly under his own name in his hometown. He lived under an assumed name on a farm in Bavaria,
where he works for 2 to 3 years.
American investigators show up at his wife's home and say, do you know what happened to your husband? And she says, I hear he's dead on the Eastern Front. And they close the file.
But Mengele's family knows that he is alive and well. They even send him money through Hans Sedlmayr.
He came from a very rich family. The Mengele family were a family who produced farm machinery in Germany.
The Mengele family ran the largest business in Günzburg. Günzburg was a company town.
But as long as Dr. Mengele stays in Germany, he remains at risk.
He was living in fear of being arrested. He saw what happened to, the Nazis in the Nuremberg trials, where all the Nazi leaders were tried, convicted, and executed by hanging. He knew, as a former Auschwitz doctor, that this could very probably be his fate if he was caught.
So he contacts his family back in Günzburg, and Sedlmayr puts him in touch with various people who can help him.
If you had enough money, you could flee.
So he crossed into Austria. From Austria, he crossed into Italy.
And like many other Nazis, he reaches Genoa.
He got an Argentine landing permit in the name of Helmut Gregor. He boarded a ship called the North King to Buenos Aires.
Mengele arrived in Argentina in August 1949. Before long, he begins selling farm machinery across South America. His business thrives.
From 49 till 59, those 10 years he spent in Argentina were actually very good years.
But after fellow SS officer Adolf Eichmann is kidnapped and indicted, Mengele's world begins to crumble.
And let me tell you, there is nothing that scared the Nazi war criminals in South America more than that indictment. It ruined everybody's day, and it especially ruined Mengele's.
He's just going from a succession of farms, being an itinerant farm manager, effectively, in Paraguay, in Brazil. And at one point when he was on a farm in Brazil, there was a young calf, had a hernia. And Mengele got out his surgical tools and performed this incredibly delicate and successful operation on removing this hernia. And the farm workers realized that actually, you're not just some Swiss farm manager you claim to be.
Israel's Mossad agents have failed to capture Joseph Mengele, but his carefree life is gone for good.
So Mengele grows increasingly isolated, depressed, and he ends up in a very modest bungalow on the outskirts of Sao Paulo.
As Mengele's fortunes dwindle, his legend grows increasingly outlandish.
Throughout the late 60s and early 70s, the reputation of Mengele grows out of all proportion. It's partly fueled by Simon Wiesenthal, who has kind of made Joseph Mengele his sort of poster boy. You know, this is the Nazi we all want to capture. This is the really bad one. This is Angel of Death.
Private individuals such as Simon Wiesenthal, you know, the Klarsfelds in Paris, they were the ones who were keeping the flame alive.
We had known that Mengele was living in Paraguay, and that's the reason I demonstrated it in front of the Ministry of Justice in order to get information about the fate of Mengele.
The Klarsfelds did try to look for him, but probably a bit too late in the day. And a lot of people remained absolutely convinced that Mengele was in Paraguay all the way through the late 60s and 70s. And in fact, he had left Paraguay.
Everyone had this notion of Mengele living in some jungle fortress with, you know, dogs yapping at his boots and cigarette boats out on the river and minions following him around.
You've got the Mengele of popular culture, boys from Brazil, the white suit, the all-powerful Nazi hiding in the jungle, the real stuff of myth.
We thought Hollywood was doing documentaries instead of films.
It turns out he lived a fairly squalid life.
And he's got this terrible nervous habit of chewing the ends of his moustache. And he chews his moustache so much that he ends up with a hairball. His paranoid nature gets worse and worse. He's not a Nazi hiding in the jungle with a huge estate. He's a little old man with a hairball.
40 years have passed since the fall of the Third Reich.
The war crimes units, such as they were at the end of the war, were incredibly ad hoc, incredibly basic, underfunded, undermanned units you could possibly imagine. And as a result, you know, he wasn't top of any lists. And if you speak to a member of the war crimes units, and you'll say, well, did you have a list with Mengele's name on it? They say to you, we didn't even have a list.
Joseph Mengele, doctor of the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp, remains at large.
There are sightings everywhere of Mengele, saying that he was in southern Spain, he was an island in Greece, he was in a Paraguayan jungle with a great big factory, he was, you know, everywhere but the moon, frankly. But no one was really hunting for him.
If there had been any serious effort, particularly by the German government, to find these criminals, it would have been extremely easy to find them and locate them and have them arrested.
This was a Nazi war criminal living in South America, communicating regularly with his family and getting money from them. And all they had to do was look at the mail, and they never did it.
I trusted the government of the world to do the right thing until I realized that they were covering up on left and on right.
In 1985, on the 40th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, Eva Kor leads a small group of survivors to the concentration camp they were sent to as children. From Auschwitz, they travel to Jerusalem, where they hold a 3-day mock trial of Dr. Mengele. Victims line up to testify against their Nazi tormentor.
I would say that it's probably the closest thing to making feel a person like an animal, like a nothing, like a piece of garbage or a piece of meat.
He would come every morning immaculately dressed. I remember his black gleaming boots.
He had this white coat and he was handsome and he wore the uniform. He was this immensely powerful figure.
I was injected with something that made me very ill.
He would deliberately infect them to see how long the infection would take in one and not the other.
I had extremely high fever, My arms, my legs were swollen to twice the size, with huge red patches all over. Painful, very painful.
Mengele's twisted desire to create an Aryan master race led to torturous experiments on more than 3,000 twins. About 200 survived.
So when Mengele came in with the 4 other doctors, and he looked at the fever chart, and he declared, laughing sarcastically, "Too schwer, too young, 2 Wochen to labor. Too bad. She's so young. She has only 2 weeks to live." That much I understood in German.
Against the odds, Eva and her sister Miriam lived to see the Red Army's liberation of Auschwitz. The rest of their family perished.
To me, it seemed like a nightmare, that somehow if I could close my eyes and open them up again, the whole nightmare would disappear. But the nightmare did not disappear.
In 1985, campaigning by Eva Kor